Investigators believe they've obtained all the evidence they're going to be able to obtain from that crime scene.
But behind the yellow tape, the agencies involved are fighting a turf war over intel. Veteran cops aren't buying the official story. An 8-minute blackout in the timeline is fueling the fire, and that isn't just hearsay. We are talking about hard evidence security tape capturing a car slipping out the back of Nancy Guthrie's subdivision right when police think she was snatched from her house. Let me paint a picture for you. An 84-year-old lady, dragged out of bed in the pitch black. Blood stains the porch tiles. The doorbell cam is obliterated. Her heart monitor goes dead at 2:28 in the morning. 30 days later, 0 cuffs on wrists, 0 leads, 0 proof of life. Sources say the DNA from the house is weak. CBS News is flagging major worries that the genetic material found might be too degraded to ID anyone. It is a mess. Mixed samples, private lab delays in Florida. The FBI is betting everything on family tree analysis now. But while the lab coats are still running the science, while detectives are praying for a name, the last man to see Nancy alive just walked right back into the crime scene. Tomaso Chion, the son-in-law, is inside the abduction zone right now. He is running a construction crew, installing alarms, drilling holes, swapping locks, bringing in dust, dirt, and work boots right on top of microscopic evidence that was already barely usable. And the question I am about to ask? Nobody is touching it. Everyone is so fixated on did Tomaso do it that they are missing the bigger picture, even if he is innocent. What is his boot print doing to the only forensic clues that could actually catch the real monster? I am not throwing around accusations. I am calling this what it is, a forensic disaster. To grasp the danger of Tomaso being there, we have to look at what that house held and what might still be hidden there. When the Pima County Sheriff and the feds first breached that door on February 1st, they walked into a nightmare that screamed abduction. One look at the chaos, and they instantly locked it down as a homicide investigation. Lab results confirmed Nancy's blood was splattered near the entry and across the porch. News helicopters caught footage of a grim trail of red staining the walkway. The Google Nest camera ripped straight off the wall. Shards of glass on the ground suggest the intruder tried to yank it, failed, and just smashed it instead. Critical survival gear, her medicine, her phone was all left behind. The sheriff's department admitted they found DNA that didn't match Nancy or her family. That is the smoking gun. Close contact rules out the family. That means a stranger left their biological mark in that house. But here is the snag. The DNA is a mess. Sheriff Nanos told NBC that the samples they pulled are problematic. We are talking mixed profiles, genetic soup from 2 people blended together. That is a nightmare to decode. Insiders told CBS the samples are low level. Translation: there might not be enough biological material to build a suspect profile. You can amplify a weak sample in a lab, sure, but that burns through time we do not have. Then there is the glove discovered 2 miles down the road. It looks just like the one the masked kidnapper wore. But when they ran it through CODIS, the FBI's database of 19 million felons, it came back blank. So, they shipped that evidence off to a private facility down in Florida. NewsNation claims bypassing the FBI lab for a private outfit is causing a massive logjam. The Bureau refuses to take direct submissions from private companies. Once Florida is done, the data has to bounce back to the Arizona State Lab, and then get uploaded to the feds. It is bureaucratic red tape, and it adds days to the clock. Now, the Sheriff's Department says they are pivoting to investigative genetic genealogy. That is the same tech that took down the Golden State Killer and nailed the suspect in the Idaho College murders. But investigative genetic genealogy isn't fast. It takes weeks, sometimes months. And while the clock ticks, you have to wonder what secrets that house is still holding. Here is the angle everyone is missing. Dr. Valentine, a forensic scientist cited by Phil Moaz, warned investigators not to get tunnel vision on just fingerprints and DNA. He pushed for a much wider sweep of the scene, saying, "It is likely the stuff we often overlook: the stray hairs, the tiny fibers, the other types of trace evidence. Because if someone stepped foot in that home, they absolutely left proof of their presence behind. Where is it? What is it? That is what we need to hunt down. We are talking hair fibers, microscopic particles that are invisible during an initial walkthrough, evidence that buries itself deep in the carpet, piles up in the dark corners, or clings to the countertops, evidence that is incredibly fragile. It can be contaminated, displaced, or destroyed just by someone walking through the room. And this is the exact house Tomaso Chion just marched into with a crew of contractors and power tools. It is the contamination warning that everybody ignored. Weeks before the house was released, former New York police detective Michael Alcazar told CNN's Aaron Burnett that the crime scene was already compromised. He didn't sugarcoat it. He said, "News outlets have been all over the place, which has now contaminated the crime scene, which just makes processing the scene that much harder because now you are dealing with extra DNA and stray fingerprints, more footprints muddying the waters." And remember, he was saying this when the contamination was just news crews standing on the lawn. Now, you have contractors inside with heavy tools and raw materials, drilling new hardware into the walls and ceilings, kicking up dust and debris in every single room. If the scene was contaminated when reporters were just on the porch, what do you call this? Let's break down exactly how Tomaso Chion ended up inside NY's house while the investigation was still very much active. February 1st to February 25th. The house is on lockdown. For nearly 4 weeks, NY's home was a secured, active crime scene. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies were in and out constantly. On February 25th, day 25, drone footage caught a group of detectives walking into the backyard by the pool, slipping through a gate to the back patio, and standing right at the front door, near the exact spot where blood was found. Former FBI Special Agent Lance Leasing explained, "Look, it is common to revisit a crime scene. Maybe you are bringing in new investigators, or a new agency jumps on the case and needs the tour. Sometimes you bring lab analysts back just to get a feel for the space. Sometimes prosecutors even visit later in the investigation." But then he dropped the crucial part. The fact that they carried bags of items out? That is a little unusual this long after the crime occurred. I would be very curious to know what is in those bags and how much evidentiary value they hold. Bags of items, day 25. They are still pulling evidence nearly a month later. That tells you one thing. The forensic picture was not complete. Then comes February 26th, the decision to release the house. On February 26th, 2 federal law enforcement sources told NBC News that authorities were getting ready to hand the home back to the Guthrie family. The sources claimed investigators didn't see a need to keep the seal on the premises or stop the family from entering anymore. The Today Show cited those same sources, confirming the Guthrie home outside Tucson was no longer a sealed crime scene and the family could return. Sheriff Nanos himself later admitted to reporters that he could have held off on releasing the property. Those were his words. He admitted on the record that keeping the house sealed was an option, but he chose not to take it. So, why was the house released? The official reason? The house had been fully processed. Every piece of evidence that could be collected had been collected. They said there was no investigative reason to keep the family out. But look at the timing. The very same week the house was released, CBS News reported the DNA evidence was low level and might not even yield a usable profile. The private lab down in Florida was dealing with delays on the mixed DNA samples. Genetic genealogy had started, but results were weeks or months away. No suspect identified, no arrests made. The FBI was in the middle of moving its command post from Tucson to Phoenix. The sheriff's department was scaling back, cutting the number of personnel on the case. They released the house at the exact moment the investigation hit its lowest point. Not when they had a breakthrough, not when the science was solid, and definitely not when an arrest was imminent. Then, from February 27th to the 28th, Tomaso enters the house. Brian Enton, of News Nation, who has been on the ground in Tucson since day one, confirmed in an interview with Dan Abrams that Tomaso Chion had been at NY's house over the last couple of days. Enton described Tomaso helping contractors install a burglar alarm and security cameras. Fox News reporter Michael Ruiz added another layer to the story. He wrote on X that new security measures were also being added at Annie and Tomaso's own home. NY's isn't the only Guthrie property getting an upgrade. Annie's place added new cameras too. So, let's be crystal clear about the sequence of events here. The FBI pulled evidence bags from the house on day 25. On day 26, they released the house. Around day 27 or 28, Tomaso Chion drops a bombshell regarding the last person to see Nancy alive. It's the man, Ashley. Sources from Banfield are calling him a prime suspect, the same man Megyn Kelly grilled publicly, who just waltzed into that house with a crew of contractors and started ripping up the crime scene. They're mounting fresh cameras right over the spots where the old ones got bashed in, and swapping out locks on doors that had been left wide open. Suddenly, A burglar alarm system is going in something that definitely wasn't there the night Nancy vanished. And get this, nobody lifted a finger to stop him. 0 questions asked. The sheriff actually gave it the green light. But here is the massive forensic nightmare with that kind of renovation. I'm about to show you an angle everyone else is missing, and it is the absolute core of this story. Think about it. When you put up security cams, you have to drill straight into the walls. You're snaking wires through the ceiling and ripping up baseboards. You're punching holes, and that kicks up a storm of plaster, wood, and drywall dust. That fine powder coats everything in the place it lands, on the rugs, the counters, the window ledges, and right onto the door frames. Then, when you're installing a burglar alarm, you're sticking sensors onto entry points and peeling back old adhesive. You're scraping down surfaces to mount new gear. But here is the problem. Every single frame they touch could be holding crucial trace evidence. We're talking fibers, hairs, maybe even skin cells that have been sitting there, perfectly preserved, since February 1st. Then you switch the locks, meaning you are ripping out hardware the intruder might have handled. You're tossing out doorknobs, deadbolts, and latches, all of which are potential gold mines for microscopic proof. And the moment those contractors step through the front door, they are dragging in a mess of their own biology, their own DNA, hair, and loose threads from their work clothes. They leave fresh boot prints on the floor and transfer their own touch DNA to every surface they grab. Every stranger walking into that building cranks up the forensic noise. Remember, CBS reported the existing DNA was already faint so low level it might not even give us a usable profile. Now, bury that under a layer of contractor dust, and recovering the truth becomes nearly impossible. Scraping a door frame for a sensor? You just scrubbed away potential biomaterial. Stomping on the carpet? You just trampled over the killer's footprints. I'm not making this up. This is basic forensic science. Go ahead. Ask any seasoned CSI, what happens when you turn a crime scene into a construction zone while the investigation is still active? They'll give you 3 words: contamination, degradation, and total destruction. But let me break down why this is way worse than just dirtying up the scene. It poses a lethal threat to the entire investigation. It comes down to something called chain of custody. In any murder trial, the evidence has to survive a brutal legal challenge. The prosecution has to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that every sample was gathered, handled, and locked away properly. They have to show it was preserved perfectly to rule out any contamination, swapping, or tampering. If the defense lawyer can find a single crack in that chain, or argue the scene was compromised for even a second, the judge can throw that evidence right out. The jury ignores it. The whole case falls apart. Now, picture this scenario. Down the road, investigators finally snag a suspect using genetic genealogy. They slap on the cuffs. They go to court. And then the defense attorney stands up and says, "Your Honor, this DNA my client supposedly left? It was pulled from a house that police had already handed back to the family. A place where the victim's own son-in-law, a man named as a potential suspect by half the media in the country. A man whose personal residence was tossed 5 separate times by the FBI, and whose wife's car was seized for processing. That man was personally supervising a construction crew, installing cameras, locks, and alarms all over the crime scene. How can the prosecution possibly guarantee the evidence wasn't contaminated or completely ruined by all that chaos? Folks, that isn't some wild conspiracy theory. That is a textbook defense motion, and with DNA this faint, it could actually work. Listen to what digital forensics pro Heather Barnhart had to say about it. Barnhart is a heavy hitter from the SANS Institute and Celebrite. That's the same company building the forensic tech the FBI used on Tomaso's phone, by the way. She told NBC News that in investigations like this, it's all about patterns. She put it like this: your phone is the silent witness to your life. It knows everything you do. You establish the routine, then you hunt for the anomalies, someone trying to cover their tracks. She told Fox News that cell towers, Wi-Fi logs, and digital breadcrumbs are the keys to the kingdom. But then she dropped a line that applies perfectly to the physical crime scene as well. The loudest evidence can be the lack of evidence. She pointed to the Koberger case, explaining how the killer created bookends around the murder just by switching off his phone. The silence was the proof. Now, apply that same logic to the house itself. If trace evidence that times should times be there is suddenly missing because it was degraded, or disturbed, or destroyed by a drill bit, That absence becomes a massive forensic hole. You can't prove what exists if it's already gone. And you certainly can't analyze truth once it's buried under a pile of drywall dust. Let's talk about the bombshell dropped by retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer right after the sheriff took the heat off the family. Coffindaffer rattled off the standard checklist for ruling a suspect out. Rock-solid alibi, digital scrub, clean DNA at the scene, passing the polygraph, playing nice with the cops, and zero paper trail of a hired hit. But she didn't stop there. She flagged one other massive detail. She claimed this screams inside job, pulled off by someone intimately familiar with the house. She told Newsweek flat out, "It makes zero sense unless this was 100% targeted." Picture the suspect, head down, moving with a purpose, making a beeline straight for that security camera. They knew exactly where the lens was looking. She believes the perp wasn't a stranger, it was someone in Nancy's orbit. A relative, a staff member, the maintenance guy, maybe a close friend. Here is where the pieces start to fit together. If we assume the culprit had VIP access to the home's layout, and if DNA is our last best shot at identifying them, and if we know that existing DNA evidence is already weak and hard to test, then protecting the integrity of that crime scene isn't just important, it is the whole ballgame. Yet, the person with the deepest knowledge of that house, the guy who managed the property, who dropped Nancy off that night, who memorized the camera angles, who knows every lock and deadbolt is currently inside that home, with a construction crew and power tools, ripping up the very surfaces that could solve this case. Then there is the 40-minute mystery. Criminal defense attorney Lee, a veteran with nearly 30 years of courtroom battles, highlighted a chilling detail in her breakdown. The intruder didn't just rush in and out. They lingered for roughly 40 minutes. The camera goes dark at 1:47 in the morning. Motion sensors trigger at 2:12 a.m. The pacemaker signal cuts at 2:28 a.m. Do the math that puts a stranger inside those walls for the better part of an hour. Lee emphasized that is an eternity during a crime. What exactly were they doing in there for 40 minutes? That is plenty of time to touch walls, drop a hair, sweat, or spread DNA everywhere. That 40-minute window undoubtedly created a trail. Now that microscopic evidence is scattered across the house, buried under drywall dust, mixed with contractor DNA, and lost on modified surfaces. Let's pause on the forensics for a second and look at the psychology, the angle everyone seems to be missing. The radio silence. We are hitting day 30, and Tomaso Chion hasn't uttered a single word to the public. No video appeals. No begging the abductors for mercy. No press conferences. No social media posts. No interviews. Zero. Meanwhile, Savannah Guthrie has dropped at least a half-dozen videos. Cameron Guthrie is out there making statements. Even Annie stood shoulder to shoulder with her siblings on camera, holding hands and pleading for her mom to come home. Hell, Savannah's colleagues at NBC are speaking up, including Hoda Kotb, who literally came out of retirement to cover this. Yet, from Tomaso, crickets. Now, to be fair, any defense lawyer worth their salt tells their client to shut up during an active investigation. Staying quiet is his constitutional right. It doesn't prove he's guilty. Plenty of innocent folks zip their lips on advice of counsel, and usually that is the smart play. But staying silent while physically inserting yourself into the crime scene, that is a different calculation. He won't talk to the press. He won't film a plea. He won't ask for his mother-in-law's return. But he will drive to the abduction site, oversee a renovation crew, and alter the physical environment. That is a behavioral choice that triggers alarm bells, not just legal ones, but psychological ones. In profiling, actions always scream louder than words. Right now, Tomaso is dodging the microphone while actively messing with the crime scene. Then there is the detail Megyn Kelly picked up on. On her SiriusXM show back on February 24th, Kelly broke down Savannah's plea video where she name-dropped her sister, Annie. Kelly noted, "With all the heat on the sister, or really, the sister's husband to me, that feels like an endorsement. It's a signal that they still back her, and by extension, they probably back Tomaso too. You don't bring up the sister unless you're trying to rehab their image." But Kelly also spotted a nuance everyone else missed. When Savannah mentioned Nancy was snatched from her bed in the dark of night, Kelly flagged it immediately. Nobody has ever confirmed that detail before. Actually, the sheriff floated that theory early on, then quickly walked it back. James Hamilton, an ex-FBI agent running the Hamilton Security Group, went on Kelly's show and backed her up. He explained, if she was taken from her bed, she didn't open the front door. If they woke her up to take her, that changes the entire profile of the crime. Remember, Tomaso dropped Nancy at the front door. Now we are hearing she was taken from her bedroom. That entire path from the entryway to where she slept is the primary crime scene, and Tomaso is currently standing in the middle of it. Look at what the sheriff actually said. In his interview with the Daily Mail, Sheriff Nanos dropped a quote that cuts both ways. He said verbatim, "If he is guilty, if he is the guy who did this, and we can prove it, then when that time comes, jump on it, but don't surprise me. Stop. Read that line one more time." He said if he is guilty. He didn't say he is innocent, and he didn't say we proved he's clean. The sheriff is hedging his bets in the very same interview where he claims to have cleared the guy. Personally, I haven't spoken much with Tomaso or Annie, but I can confirm my detectives are talking to them. So, the sheriff who publicly cleared Tomaso isn't speaking to him, yet the investigative team is still grinding away? What exactly are the detectives telling Tomaso? Did they actually give him the green light to rip up the crime scene? Do they even know he's over there with a construction crew? Did a single forensic expert sign off on this before the renovations started? Here is the comparison everyone is missing. We need to stack Tomaso's actions up against other major headline cases. Look at the Idaho student murders. Police zeroed in on Brian Koberger partly because of a digital pattern experts call bookends. He killed his phone right before the attack and powered it back on immediately after. That total digital silence during the murder window was a massive red flag. Detectives could prove his device went off the grid exactly when the killings took place. Now, bring that back to the Nancy Guthrie case. Police hooked Tomaso's phone up to Celebrite extraction tech and seized his computer. They tore his car apart looking for clues. If those gadgets showed he was just scrolling or texting between 10 at night and 2:28 in the morning, that clears him. But if that phone went dead, that screams guilty. And the sheriff refuses to tell the public what they found. So the guy with the unexplained digital gap is now physically altering the very place the crime happened. Suddenly, you have contractor devices pinging the Wi-Fi and fresh cell signals hitting the local towers. You have work boots stomping over old footprints and strangers leaving DNA on surfaces that might still hold the kidnapper's genetic code. Let's talk about the fortress Annie and Tomaso are building around themselves. Michael Ruiz from Fox News reported that the couple slapped new cameras on their personal residence, the same house the FBI has raided at least 5 times. They even brought in muscle. A private guard was spotted stationed in their driveway as far back as February 7th, right after Nancy vanished. Here is the picture. You have a couple terrified enough to hire armed guards for their own place, but at the same time, they are running a renovation project at the victim's house. This is their mother-in-law's home, the place where they found blood, where lenses were shattered, where a phantom stalked the halls in the dark. Nobody disputes that the house needs security. Obviously, it does. The million-dollar question is, why is Tomaso the one holding the drill? Why isn't a neutral third-party contractor handling this under the lawyer's supervision? Why not use a firm vetted by the FBI? Why let the last person to see Nancy alive run the show? Sheriff Nanos put it this way: nobody is caught. He told the Daily Mail he gets the criticism. He knows people are fixated on Tomaso being the last contact. He basically said, we get it, but come on, you are painting a target on a guy who could be totally innocent. Could be innocent, not is, could be. This is the sheriff who cleared him using conditional language. To understand why Tomaso having free reign at the house is dangerous, you have to look at the investigation status. It is not in a good spot. The FBI is stepping back, moving their command center from Tucson to Phoenix. Brian Enton reported the logic is that they need to sift through 10,000 hours of footage, which agents can do remotely. But let's be real. The optics are terrible. The feds left town, and the sheriff is hitting the brakes. On February 27th, Department spokesperson Angelica Carrillo made it official. The massive task force is gone. It is just the core detectives now. That is police code for we are cutting the budget. Meanwhile, the DNA evidence is in limbo. CBS reports it is a mess, degraded samples, mixed profiles, and a private lab in Florida dragging its feet. Genetic genealogy is running, but that takes months. CODIS gave them nothing. We are at day 30. 0 suspects, 0 persons of interest, 0 handcuffs. That phantom on the doorbell cam? Still a ghost. The car spotted at 2:36 in the morning, 2.5 miles away, never found. The tip line is flooded, but dry. Over 23,000 calls. 750 of those poured in right after the $1 million reward dropped. But CNN. John Miller says it is mostly noise, no solid leads. And the ransom demands? Total radio silence. They got 2 notes they actually believed were real. Then, whoever sent them just ghosted. Miller thinks the ransom angle was a smokescreen, a cover-up for a home invasion that went wrong fast, not a real kidnapping. And then you have former Lieutenant Michael Gould dropping this bombshell assessment. Gould dropped a bombshell on the press, suggesting Nancy Guthrie probably didn't survive past the first 72 hours. Without her daily heart medication, the clock likely ran out on her fast. He also pinpointed the search radius to a tight 2 to 5 miles from her front door, which fits the standard profile for abduction dump sites. That is the harsh reality of the terrain we are looking at. The investigation is hitting a wall. DNA testing is stalled, the feds are pulling back, and the sheriff is winding down operations. No leads, no ransom, just an expert opinion that she is gone. And right into this mess walks Tomaso Chion, flanked by a contractor and carrying power tools to mount a new security system. Think about the physical evidence for a second that DNA is our one shot at nailing the person who took Nancy. If a defense lawyer gets that tossed out of court because the scene was contaminated after the fact, the blame falls squarely on whoever signed off on unlocking those doors. All eyes turn to Sheriff Chris Nanos, a guy who scraped a re-election win by just 481 votes and faced a brutal 98.8% no-confidence vote from his own deputies. We are talking about a department where veterans walked out and rookies are steering the biggest case in the country. But here's the question everyone is ignoring. Is Tomaso Chion actually responsible for Nancy Guthrie vanishing? Look, he hasn't been cuffed, and prosecutors haven't filed a thing. Law enforcement hasn't slapped a suspect or even person of interest label on him. The sheriff officially cleared him on February 16th. For all we know, the guy is clean. But ask yourself this: should someone who the public has been eyeing suspiciously, a man whose house the FBI raided 5 separate times, whose wife's car got impounded, and whose electronics were scrubbed for data, someone whose cleared status is being openly questioned by veteran reporters and retired federal agents, be given unsupervised keys to a crime scene when the DNA evidence is already weak and the case is wide open? Take Tomaso out of the equation for a minute. Put literally anyone else in his shoes. If a cleared individual in an active investigation waltzed back into the primary scene with a construction crew before the lab work was done, wouldn't that set off alarm bells? This isn't about guilt or innocence. It is about protecting the chain of custody. Even if Tomaso is innocent, him being there could trample the very clues needed to find the real bad guy. It creates a massive hurdle for prosecutors trying to convict the actual killer. You are practically handing a future defense team a get-out-of-jail-free card to attack the DNA findings. It sabotages the whole investigation. Now, if Tomaso actually is guilty, letting him back in is playing right into his hands. No matter how you slice it, this is a disaster. Someone in charge needed to step up and say, "Hold on, you wait for the lab reports, you wait for the genealogy breakdown, you figure out what the DNA says first. Then you can worry about renovations and changing the locks." But that order didn't come down. Instead, the sheriff gave the green light. So the feds packed up, and now the last man to see Nancy breathing is roaming around the house she was snatched from. We are at day 30. It has been a full month since Nancy disappeared. The physical evidence is sitting in some Florida laboratory, and it might not amount to much. We are talking trace amounts of DNA, mixed profiles, and 0 hits in the national database. Building a family tree from the genetics could drag on for months. We still don't know who the masked guy on the doorbell cam is, and that mystery vehicle from 2:36 in the morning remains a ghost. Silence on the ransom front. There is a $1 million cash pile waiting for anyone who talks, no questions asked. Yet, nobody has offered a single useful lead. The FBI is operating out of Phoenix now, and the sheriff's office is throttling back the manpower. The news crews are packing their gear and heading out of Tucson to chase the next headline. Savannah Guthrie has admitted her mother might not be coming back. Meanwhile, Tomaso Chion, the guy who dropped Nancy off at 9:48 that night on January 31st, remains the last known contact. He is the one Ashley Banfield's sources are flagging as a prime suspect. He is the one Megyn Kelly is openly grilling on air. This man, whose life was turned upside down by 5 police searches and who hasn't uttered a word to the public in 30 days, is currently drilling holes in the crime scene because nobody told him to stop. Kindness matters might be a nice slogan, but it is not a valid forensic strategy. If you know anything about where Nancy Guthrie went, get on the line with the FBI at 1-800, call FBI, or dial the Pima County Sheriff's Office at 520-351-49. You can also drop an anonymous tip to Tucson Crime Stoppers at 88-CRIME. The family has put up a $1 million bounty payable in cash or crypto for any intel that brings Nancy home or leads to a conviction. You can stay completely in the shadows. Someone out there holds the key. Be the one who brings her home.